So I'm Dustin Connor, I'm a game designer, and as part of being a game designer, I love playing games and deconstructing games. And because we have a bit of a games history theme, I've been invited to talk about what was possibly the very first game I remember interacting with, which is The Legend of Zelda, which is very near and dear to me. I wasn't really sure how many people here are actually enjoy The Legend of Zelda, consider themselves Legend of Zelda fans. Decent amount. Great. So my first memories of Legend of Zelda are my mom ostensibly buying a NES for me when I was 3 years old, and then playing Legend of Zelda in front of me. Fortunately, I went on to love the game. But the games change, especially big franchises, like sequels. And I reached this point where I decided actually I'm not the target audience for this anymore. And rather than be either an angry fanboy or just rage quit the whole thing, I kind of decided at some point to deconstruct that and blog it. And yeah, so that's what I'm here to talk about. Hopefully we can get some perspective at the end of it. So, this is the bad part about having notes on the page. When I say I'm not the target audience anymore, I want to be relatively clear that I don't actually think the game is worse. I don't think the quality of the games have gone down. But I am less and less likely to go and pick it up. I get less excited when I hear around Legends that we're coming out of it. I still love what it represents. It still kind of represents to me this idea of exploration, maybe some puzzles, this kind of fantasy action adventure, even though that makes a really terrible genre. It still kind of summarizes something about the game. And I think the Zelda label specifically signifies a really well thought out and tested and iterated version of that. You might see these things, exploration and puzzles and action adventure, in a recent indie game or something, but it doesn't have the same sort of pedigree that The Legend of Zelda does. However, there are a few really strong forces behind the scenes in the design of a franchise, and I'm talking specifically about Legend of Zelda, that make it no longer really applicable to me. So first, some of the things that I associate really specifically with Zelda. So I mentioned kind of the play aesthetics, those things like exploration and puzzles, but there's also the icons, the characters involved, the monsters, the locations, some of the tools, and some of their associated mechanics, which I'll get back to. But as a designer, I'm also really fascinated by what they use to pace the game. So they've got an overworld, and they have dungeons, and each one has kind of a really distinct feel, a density of gameplay to it. And Zelda games have fallen into this general niche of you have sort of 3-ish dungeons to get you started out in the game, and then they kind of open it up, and the not so surprising surprise that actually you have to go to 6 to 8 more dungeons to collect 6 to 8 pieces of something. And that stuff is that's all part of what The Legend of Zelda is at this point. And there's great reasoning behind that. By keeping things the same, they are, it's a great marketing tool. So it was talked about earlier that if you're going to review a game, there's very few better ways than to just play it in front of people. Or if you want to know about a game, you go and you watch it be played. But by keeping certain things consistent across the franchise, they're telling you a lot of what you can expect, a lot of what you already need to know. And that makes it predictable, but it's also good that it's communicating to you about the game before you know anything else. Also, whether I like it or not, nostalgia sells, and they are ultimately a business, and I respect that. I'm glad that they keep making money and keep making games, and if some people go out and buy it because fun childhood memories, like the ones I was talking about earlier, then great. Also, there's an element of if it's not broken, don't fix it. These things haven't worked in the past for them. They, again, sell. They'll probably sell again. They'll probably continue to sell for some time to come. I also wanted to say that, like, over the iteration of like the Legend of Zelda series, they've been able to work on things like ease of use, which are really important to, well, lots of different players, but especially like the enfranchised user, but also the overwhelmed user. And for a moment, who here has played the original Legend of Zelda? Plenty of people. I still consider it like a brilliant work of design. Like I've actually gone back and played it recently, and there is a certain freedom to the openness to what it doesn't tell you, to the fact that you can kind of wander around and walk into a cave and see in the top right corner that it says level 3 before you ever stumble upon levels 1 and 2. But for all that's great about it, it wasn't user-friendly. Like, it didn't really, like, all this lack of instruction is great for discovery, but terrible for, like, a new player, somebody who's overwhelmed, somebody who just wants to, like, pick up and play for a little while. And that sort of stuff has been improved over the course of the series, and that's something they've learned. The game is different for it, but that's also part of what makes it not a game for me. I mean, I know what I'm doing when I make Legends. I've played most of them. If they're going to spend a lot of time on this ease of use, that time is slightly wasted on me. So ultimately, I'm not really a super enfranchised user. Like, I will always speak fondly of The Legend of Zelda, but I'm not going to pick it up because it's The Legend of Zelda. I'm not overwhelmed, so these like the familiarity, that's not really for me. Which I think is the question: why would I play a new Legend of Zelda? And then this kind of comes to the heart of why I would play kind of any game series and why franchises can be great. And that is ultimately the tweaks and the fine-tuning. I think that in continuing to make The Legend of Zelda over and over again, in continuing to strive to make a game that is both the same and also its own thing and not the same, every game that they made needed its own identity, and that leads to tweaks to their formula, whether they're kind of small modifications or what we would consider like a major gimmick for the game. And each of those has a chance to be absolutely brilliant, to totally make the game, to maybe even stick around and become a permanent part of the series. And if you add all those up, the game can kind of just keep getting better and better. Even if I wasn't going to pick up the next Legend of Zelda, I love to see the games that I love getting better. I still think it's fantastic. I think that, I'll get a little bit specific, but I'm in no means like a Zelda fanatic or historian, so I'm actually going to start off with questions later on by asking all of you for your examples, because why not? But some examples from Legend of Zelda, that big things that I would like to see evolve, that would represent really big changes in the series, but I think also in the medium as a whole. But I like to see the story change. Like, they use it for pacing reasons and familiarity reasons, but I recently saw a great take on, and probably many people saw this, but a great take on what if Zelda were the heroine, and what if Link were female or changeable gender or anything like that. What if it wasn't just a rescue princess story? Even if their game isn't about story. like all the more reason that it's like a very tiny knob that they can tweak, and all of a sudden this fantastic exploration adventure is accessible to many more people. Like I can recommend it to, I don't know, 500,000 more people. Arbitrary number, probably much more. I would love to see more of a back and forth between their kind of linear tutorials and this ease of use which they've learned over time, and the more explory stuff that made, say, like the original game great, that I think came back in something like Wind Waker, or that I appreciated in the game I originally wrote this about, the recently A Link Between Worlds. And then there are little things which, like, I can designer geek out over, like the currency system. I still appreciate something like that changing. So that's, I've gone on what feels like ages to me, but it's probably a relatively short talk. I don't know. One question. Oh, that's great. I've gone on much longer. But mostly what I just wanted to say in conclusion is that as a player, I love to see the games that I love grow and evolve, whether or not I'm like, whether or not it's for me, whether it's for a new generation of gamers, whether it's for a different kind of gamer. And as a designer, I'm always curious about kind of new approaches to sequels and franchises, like especially with kind of widespread adoption of things like downloadable content and alternate payment models, even if Nintendo's unlikely to immediately adopt these things. And when it comes to specifically a new Zelda title, because this is a Zelda case study, I would almost certainly speak fondly of it, if only in reverence of kind of my past experiences, but being an optimist, I always hope for more from it. And so I always hope that the next Zelda will kind of change up its pacing a little bit, or change up its story a little bit, or tweak something like the currency system, which they did recently, and it was really good. And yeah, that's it. So,
You look like one question.
One question. That's generous.
I'm just curious as to whether sort of you talked about the difference that, as you see it, for Zelda as a series, being that it's foregone some of its challenge in favour of increased accessibility, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. Do you feel that that's possibly something that could be applied to, as I see it, a lot of Nintendo franchises, and possibly this is why this is something that do you think that this is something that not enough people are accepting of, that this is a change that's happening? It's not necessarily for those people anymore, but it is still for someone.
I think part of the reason that I originally wrote this blog is absolutely what you're saying, is that whether it's Nintendo or any game franchise that goes on long enough, like, again, in the spirit of kind of analyzing and deconstructing, that it's possible for again, I was the target audience at one point, but at one point I was 3 years old watching my mom play Legend of Zelda with like her hand-drawn map on the wall. I'm not that person anymore. And the games industry is not what it like. I mean, we've been talking about the history of games, and the context around these games change. And part of why I'm giving this talk, part of why I wrote the blog, is that I wanted to really deconstruct that, see if there was kind of any perspective that could come out of it, something I could take away from it, and mostly just not be that upset about it. And like, if there's new design space because of it, like if Nintendo could make a new franchise which represented what I want as a player, and that could be profitable for them, then